This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening everyone. Let's continue this really interesting adventure about the subject of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger's attempt to reinstate smicha to reinstate Tekiah Shofar on Shabbos in the holy city of Yerushalayim. And last night we learned 13 different arguments that Rav Schlesinger offered, and how do the Chachamim, or the majority opinion, how do they respond to his taina? Now, the first taina.
Share the screen with the marmakomos.
Yeah, let me try to do that. Let me see if I could bring up the marmakomos. Thank you. Let's see if we could do this. Share screen. Okay. It's going to be very hard to read because they're not bad. Not terrible. Even better.
Yeah, a little larger. That's better. That's not bad.
Not bad.
Okay.
So again, let's continue. The first taina of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is that we know that a mitzvah d'oraisa could push off an isur d'Rabbanan. Namely, the example he brought was Tzar Balei Chayim could push off the isur d'Rabbanan of being mevatel kli mehechanoi. By the way, if anybody happens to be learning Mishnah Berurah with us, today's Mishnah Berurah spoke about the isur to put a cup under an egg that was born on Yom Tif because it's mevatel the kli from being able to be used. So therefore, the Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger argued, we know that Sar Balei Chayim would allow you to violate being mevatel a kli mehechanoi. That being the case, if a d'oraisa could push off a d'Rabbanan, why can't Tekiah Shofar on Shabbos push off the d'Rabbanan of the Gzeira of Rabba? So the argument against that is very clear. That Sar Balei Chayim is not a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah saseh. Tzar Balei Chayim is an isur. An isur d'oraisa could push off an isur d'Rabbanan. A mitzvah d'oraisa, not necessarily would it push off a d'Rabbanan, even though you can. What do you mean? But a d'oraisa could push off a lav. I say d'chaloisa. I say yeah. But sometimes, by the way, if you want to follow inside, I'm in page 3, second column, ois beis. Okay. So the halacha that d'oraisa could trump a d'Rabbanan is only Tzar Balei Chayim, which is an isur d'oraisa, could push off a d'Rabbanan. Masha'in came the asay of Tekiah Shofar, we have no precedent that could push off the d'Rabbanan, lest you come to carry. Next argument of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is that an asay of the Rabbim could push off even a d'oraisa. An asay of the Rabbim, even a d'Rabbanan, could push off even a d'oraisa. For example, you're allowed to free an Eved Kanani. You could free an Eved Kanani to make a minyan, because it's a mitzvah of the Rabbim, and that could push off a d'Rabbanan. That could push off a d'oraisa of Lo'olam Mahem Tavodu. We know you're not allowed to work avodim, so the asay of making a minyan, which is only d'Rabbanan of a Rabbim, could push off the d'oraisa of Lo'olam Mahem Tavodu. So therefore we should say Tekiah Shofar, which is a mitzvah of the Rabbim, should also push off the lav of Shema Yavirenu, if l'chara it should even be able to push off a d'oraisa. So Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky said the way we address that, interestingly, is that the isur of Lo'olam Mahem Ta'avodu is not a real d'oraisa. It's only an asmachta d'Rabbanan and not an asay gemura. Now I would say, well, still, but that means a d'Rabbanan of the Rabbim could push off a d'Rabbanan of Lo'olam Mahem Ta'avodu. So why can't the d'oraisa of Tekiah Shofar push off the d'Rabbanan of Shema Yavirenu? I personally would add, in the sugya of freeing the Eved Kanani, and violating La'olam Behem Tavoidu, I believe the Ran over there says an interesting thing. What's the Isser of freeing an Eved Kanani? It comes from Loi Sechanim. You can't give a guy a gift for nothing, but where you stand to gain, you're not giving it to them for nothing. So I would say the reason why you could free your Eved Kanani and violate La'olam Behem Tavoidu is because there's no Isser Bechlal, the Ran says over there. Because it's derived from Leisachanim, and when you're gaining something, there's no Isser at all. So in my humble opinion, that's not a good precedent. Next. In Ois Daled, he says something I'm not 100% clear. He says that if you're at all in doubt whether the Rabbanon extended their Gzeira to a certain case and to be Mavatel, a Dairaisa B'Sheva Al Tasa, you should not apply it if you're Masupik, if they said their din there. So the Rabbi Chiyah Michal Tukachinsky says, no, that is not correct. That's not what it means. What it means is not, don't apply the Gzeir D'Rabbanan if you're not sure if it applies. But rather, if they said to be Oikar Davar Min HaTorah B'Sheva Al Taseh, that's only when there's a Vadai Isser D'Rabbanan, and not when there's a Machloikis whether there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. But if there is an Isser D'Rabbanan, let's say of Rabbah, which definitely applies, then it would apply even to be Oikar Davar Min HaTorah. Now, here's the next argument. That which the Ran and the Turei Even rely on the fact that, remember the Ran and the Turei Even said, well, this is different than Lulav. Now, honestly, I'm not really clear about that question, but there was a distinction made between Lulav and Shofar, in that we had an easier time being Mavatel Lulav because you could always take it on a different day. Masha'inkein, the Chachamim don't want to be Mavatel Shofar Mikol V'chol. How could the Rabbanon be Oiker the Shofar completely? So that was the question of the Ran, and based on that was the argument of the Ran, and based on that argument that the Chachamim don't want to be Oiker the Shofar, Rav Akiva Yosef Schlesinger wanted to say that we should rely on the Rif that you could blow Bizman Hazeh on Shabbos. So the Chachamim said back, you can't have your cake and eat it. You want to rely on the Rif or you want to rely on the Ran? The Rif is the one who says that it applies Bizman Hazeh, but if you want to rely on the Ran doesn't hold like the Rif. The Ran never said you're allowed to blow shofar even on a bezin that doesn't have smicha. So you want to rely on the Ran's argument that how could the Chachamim be oiker the shofar entirely, and therefore they left the situation where you could be oiker the shofar. But the Ran doesn't hold like the Rif that you're allowed to blow the shofar. The Ran does not hold like the Rif that you're allowed to blow the shofar if you don't have a bezdin of smuchim. Furthermore, says the Chachamim are not being oiker shofar entirely. You know why? Because there's a rule. There's always next year. So you blow next year. And I blowed last year. The Chachamim are not going to be oiker the whole concept of shofar. But if on a year where Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos, maybe they will be oiker. Then the Rabbi Chil Michal Tukachinsky brings in Ois Vav over here, that he quoted the Shar HaMelech who darshans Yom Trua that you blow the shofar even on Shabbos. So if there's a beferish drasha that you blow it even on Shabbos, the Chachamim can't be oiker. So the response to that is the Shar HaMelech that says there's a drasha that you blow the shofar even on Shabbos. That's only, Rabbi Isai, that's only fits in according to Rebbe Lezer, who holds Machshirei mitzvah is doiche Shabbos. But according to the other Tanoim, that Machshirei mitzvah are not doiche Shabbos, then we don't have this drasha. Okay, furthermore, do you remember Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger wanted to say that even the Rambam would agree to the Rif that you don't need a bezdin of smuchim. Because the Rambam, he argued, holds you only need the top bezdin that's possible. However, a bezdin, even if it doesn't have smicha, But if Bizman Hazeh, it's the best bezin you have, namely, let's say in the time where there was no smicha, but they can kaddish the chodesh, or even Bizman Hazeh, the Rambam would agree to the Rif that you could use that kind of bezdin and blow the shofar. So the Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky said the Chachamim feel that that's very incorrect. None of the poskim grip the Rambam in that fashion. Moving right along. Argument Ches. He wanted to say that the same way that a towel of a Rabbim could be used by the Rabbim because they will remind each other, so too, why don't we say that since the shofar is being blown by the Rabbim, there's no Gzeira D'Rabbanan because they'll remind each other. So first of all, Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky says that svara, that 10 people could use one towel, does not hold true in the Maskana of the Gemara. But furthermore, that's by definition a faulty argument, because if it was true, then Rabbah never would have been able to make a Gzeira and be Mavato Shofar on Shabbos, because what do you mean, Shema Yavirenu, but it's a Rabbim and they'll remind each other. So clearly, Rabbah didn't care about that svara. Furthermore, do you remember that he argued that Bizman Hazeh we don't have a Rishus Harabim D'Oraisa. We don't have a big thoroughfare. So the Chachamim argued back, so then why does the Mishnah say that when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, they were masakin only to blow in Bezdin and not anywhere else, but there were no more Rishus Harabims. So clearly if they said when the temple was destroyed, when there are no more Rishus Harabims, you still can't blow on Shabbos, so that means they held like this, that the original Gezerah was made in a time that there were Rishus Harabims, and once the Gezerah was made for them, then the Gzeira applies everywhere, even in Rishus Hayachid, even in a Carmelis. I mean, let's say guys in quarantine, and let's say, for example, I can't say who, but there's a certain yeshiva that I know that a lot of children go to that was closed down yesterday, and their parents are going up the wall. What do you do with the kids all day at Erev Yom Tov? I'm not saying who, when, where, I cannot reveal. And not only that, the Department of Health calls the parents on the hour. How was your kid exposed? Where was your kid exposed? And then they tell you where the kid was exposed. And then they tell you, and they call the grandparents in Brooklyn about the kids. And they have a whole list of indiscriminate questions, and now, okay. But be it as it may, let's say someone's in quarantine. I have a new thing in Eretz Yisrael. They're in quarantine, so they should blow shofar on Shabbos because there's no gzeira Shema Yavirenu Daled Amos, because the Mossad is gonna, I don't know what to them.
But Rabbi, can I ask you? I don't understand this whole svara that in Eretz Yisrael, the time when the Beis HaMikdash was Kayam, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only possible Rishus Harabim that I can think of. I mean, you had villages, you had Kforim. It was in an economy that was full of agronomy, right? I mean, it was all farms, basically. The only place might have been Yerushalayim at the time of Shlosh Regalim. Other than that, when could they possibly have had a Rishus Harabim?
I mean, even then, I don't think...
Why were they worried about carrying in Rishus Harabim?
So apparently, once Rabbah made a gzeira about a possible case of Rishus Harabim, that Gezerah applies even in Rishus HaYachid and even in a Carmelis. And Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky says that it would apply in Yerushalayim even when the gates are locked. Because once the rabbis made a Gezerah, they made it because of the Rishus Harabim, but it extended to all times and to all areas. Furthermore, you want to say, well, just, to make things better, this is an Ois, Yod Aleph, we'll make a bezdin of 23. Says Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky, how does 23 help? 23 is loy malav loy moirid. If you need a bezdin that has smicha, then you need them to have smicha, and you could have 200 guys, and they could know shas and poiskim. It's not a credible Sanhedrin. If you don't need smicha, then what does 23 do? Furthermore, if you remember, because of the plight of Russian Jewry, his argument was, okay, so if it's not blowing the shofar, so it's like we're blowing chatzoitz rois to alarm the people to pray. But the question is, you're not allowed to blow chatzoitz rois on Shabbos, l'maskana, because of Gzeira Shema Yavirenu. Finally, toward the end, Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger says, he wanted to argue, the whole gezerah is you might come to carry the shofar after you use it, so we'll put it under, we'll refund the police, and we'll make policemen to guard the shofar, that nobody carries it. Well, he says, we know there's one thing when it comes to the gezerahs of the Rabbanon, and that is, le'nitain l'shiurin. The Chachamim, when they make a gezerah, let's say the Chachamim say, okay, we're worried that if you dance, you might make a musical instrument. Yeah, but let's say a guy says, look, I will make a musical instrument. I'm a clumsy guy, so that guy could clap his hands. Avada not. The Chachamim, when they make a gezerah, they make a blanket gezerah. So it's not going to help if you appoint shoitrim and guard the shofar so that nobody carries the shofar. And finally, the final argument of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is, look, who gets the Isser for blowing the shofar? The listeners? No, not the listeners. The blower. So the blower gets the Isser D'Rabbanan, but everyone else is Mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa. So isn't there a principle? It's preferable for someone to do a small Aveira to be mezakeh others in a big mitzvah. So I'll be the guy, I'll blow the shofar, I'll violate a D'Rabbanan, and they'll all get a d'oraisa. Why don't we say Chatei Kedei Sheyizka Chavercha? He says, number one, Lamaisa, the guy. So I would argue, if that's the case, then that defeats the whole Gzera of Rabba. Then what's Rabba's Gzera? Have one guy blow the shofar for everyone else, and he'll take it on the chin for everybody else. That's what he says. The Imkain. Here, let me read that inside. He says.
Rabbi, whenever you say mitzvah shabbat veira, just like someone have a stolen shofar.
I mean, is it a mitzvah haba ba'avera? Well, it's only a d'Rabbanan. Is it a mitzvah haba ba'avera? Now, by the way, maybe tomorrow I'll give a little clip. There's a machlokes, I believe, Rabbi Akiva Eger and others, according to Rabba, that you're not to blow shofar because Gzeira Shemi Yavrena Da'adamis. Let's say you did blow the shofar, are you yoytzei the mitzvah, or did the Chachamim, were they oiker the kiyam ha-mitzvah? Now, by the way, this whole argument of Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is assuming you get the mitzvah. If you wouldn't get the mitzvah, then there would be no point in telling him blow the shofar for everybody else. Now, so number one, this is oiker the whole din of Rabbah. But number two, Lamaisa, this guy has an Isser, so he's not allowed to do it. But he argues further that incorporated in the gezerah of not blowing is also not telling someone else to blow for you. That's part of the gezerah. So in fact, those who commission someone to blow the shofar. Now, by the way, that might be part of what Reb Shmuel Salant supposedly said. He said, if Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger was blowing the shofar, I would go ahead and listen to it behind the wall. Now, meaning I would never ask him to, maybe I would be violating Nisud Rabbanan. But if I would know he's doing it anyway, then I would go to listen. Maybe I couldn't make an appearance because that would lend my support, and maybe then he would also be incorporating Nisud Rabbanan. But at the very least, Rabbi say, this what was the counter response to Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, and it's quite amazing that I do not think that after his attempt, or maybe his possible blowing in that fateful year, that it was ever blown again on Shabbos. But Be'ezus Hashem, there will be a time when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos that we will blow the shofar. I would assume that when Mashiach comes and the smicha is reinstated, so according to even the Rambam, you'll be able to blow shofar in Yerushalayim, and for sure in the Mikdash we won't be goizer Shema Yavirenu. So hopefully, Be'ezus Hashem, I guess if Mashiach comes tonight or tomorrow, then we will hear the shofar, the Shabbos. But either way, we hope to hear the Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cheirusenu. So this was the story and the interesting controversy, and I want to take the opportunity to wish everyone a ksiva chsima tova and a good bench jar. Thanks for joining. Amen.
And you have nachas from the children.
Amen.
And the whole family, and you should have good health.
Amen. V'chein lamar. Thank you very much. Kol tov. Agat yom tif, agat yar. Yom tif, good yar, everyone.
Thank you for all your Torah during the course of the year.
Thank you for everything. Shkoyach.
A lot of chizuk.
Ma'izchos.
Especially retirees.
Okay. Shkoyach. Good yar. Good yom tif, good yar. Yom tif, good yar, Avrami. How are you? Good yom tif, good yar. What?
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to a new, fresh year.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.